We have with us today an unusual person, rather a remarkable person. Mr. Fuller is described as an architect. He is that because of his intense concern with living space. But he is something more than an architect because his obsession is with the architecture of the universe. We all have heard of Mr. Fuller's invention, the geodesic dome. It is now seen all over the world. It is a brilliant use of space and material. Then there is the world map and other items. But what is far more important, Mr. Fuller has shown how to get the maximum from the minimum material by making the most intelligent use of the resources available on Earth. He has often spoken of how he was born with the handicap of farsightedness. As a child, he could see the far-off things clearly. And as a young man, he lighted upon the idea that if Einstein is more right than Newton, then the mind ought to live in tune with the speed of light.
Synergy means behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behavior of their parts. The most extraordinary example of it is what we call mass attraction. One great massive sphere and another massive sphere hung by tension members are attracted to one another. We find then there's nothing in one sphere in its own right that predicts it's going to be attractive to another. You have to have the two. It is then the synergy which holds our Earth together with the moon. And it is our synergy that holds the Earth flying formation around the sun together with the moon held into the solar system. It is synergy which holds our whole universe together.
What can we do on behalf of our fellow man? What can I do on behalf of you without trespassing on you? Because I don't think I'm going to bring any advantage to you if I, for instance, decrease your freedoms, if I put on more restraints, if I reduce the number of options that you have. I think I've got to definitely, anything I do must increase your freedoms, and increase your options and so forth. Anyway, if I saw something just going to hit you in the head, and I grab it, and so before it hits you in the head, you say, I wish you hadn't done that because I wanted to die. And I said, well, I'd like to give you the option. If you really want to die that much and you've chosen to die, then you can really jump out the window anytime you want. But I'd like to give you the option. So I don't think I've trespassed on you because you didn't know this was going to hit you. And so I became interested in what myself, as a very average, really low average man, might really have that could be turned to advantage of others. And if I could make such discoveries, and they would be really experimental, this might open up other people to making such discoveries, because what I was hoped to look for was not recognized in any school or any of the conventional ways of treating with young people. And I saw young people really discouraged on beautiful spontaneity in the child that was continually frustrated in one way or another. So I said, as much as the parents are part of the environment of the child, I've got to do something about those parents. For instance, a mother is very tired, and she's also worried how they're going to pay the rent. And the child does something and she doesn't understand it, or she just reflects it by taking it out on the child. Happens many, many times. So I said, I must do everything I can to have an environment where their mother doesn't have anything to worry about the rent, and she doesn't, is not tending to get tired, by virtue of which she will, her real spontaneity would be to be very attentive and thoughtful towards the child. I want you to think about yourself now in the terms of a moving picture scenario. I'm going to run a moving picture of you in a backwards manner. You've just had breakfast. Now I'm going to run the picture backwards, and all the food comes out of your mouth and on the plate, and then the plates go back up onto the serving, and then they go back in the things on the stove, things go back in the icebox, they go back into cans, come out of the icebox and in the cans, and they go back to the store, and then from the store go back wholesaling, then they go back to factories where they're going to put together, and then things go back into trucks and then ships, and then they finally get back to pineapples in Hawaii, and then they go, the pineapples separate out and go back into the air, the raindrops go back into the sky, and so forth. And within a very fast, accelerated reversal of a month, practically everything has come together that you now have on board of you, which is gradually beginning to be your hair and your skin and so forth, was a couple of months ago, some air coming over the Himalaya mountains and so forth. In other words, you got very completely deployed, and so I want to begin to think about yourself in an interesting way, as each one of these, there were trajectories. If we'd had a tracer, some way of putting tracers on to make photographs, we could see these very remote chemical elements gradually getting closer and closer together, and finally getting into these various vegetable places, and into roasts, and into tighter and tighter in cans, getting in the store, finally getting into just being me, and that's being temporarily my hair, my ear, some part of my skin, and then that gets off and gets cut off, and that breaks up and goes off and gets blowing around as dust, and gets another set of assemblies. In other words, I'm coming to a concept of each one of us being a very complex pattern integrity which you're born with. I love the sound of the oars. It goes on and on. Absolutely second nature to me, the oars. And so I can keep on thinking about realizing that I'm rowing any more than I'm breathing. Rowing becomes just as normal to me as breathing. My boyhood was all the summer times of it was spent here in Penobscot Bay. This is the route this way, going along here now, so I'm rowing here, which I went off to get the mail every day, 2 miles away over Eagle Island or Butter Island, and return. So the very essence of my life now has become one of thinking and using your intuition. And so my boat, which I imagine will be the last boat I'll ever buy, I hope it's the best boat in the world, and I gave it the name Intuition. That being really a key of thinking. And this whole dealing with nature in powerful, completely liquid manner called for constant alertness and constant feeling of nature. This is the environment of not only thinking but quick thinking. It had to be the right thinking. So you learn that you got to make very, very quick decisions, as all over. Nature takes you to the bottom awful fast. In 1927, I was completely inspired by the birth of a new child, our first child having died 5 years earlier. I had attributed the death of our first child to the fact that man had paid no attention to the environment. With our new daughter born 5 years after that, I said, I'm really going to give the rest of my life to the new young life. Found myself committed to turning everything I had ever learned to the account of child. I'm committed myself to reforming the environment, not reforming the man. Absolutely confident if you give him the right environment, he will behave favorably. I had to expand what I'd already learned by a great deal. I had to unlearn a great deal that I had already been taught was so, that I'd found was not so. And I know that I could, by employing the kind of capabilities I've learned that are employed in building a battleship, how you do more with less. I'm so convinced that the more with lessing could make it possible for us to possibly do so much with so little that we could take care of everybody and there need not be any of the suffering that is around the world. I pledged both to my daughter who died and the daughter who's now born, I was committing myself to humanity. I've got to commit myself to how do you alter the environment. The money, I think, is absolutely irrelevant. I see it's really man and his environment in his time, and you can get the environment to begin to do work with you. Undertaking then to reform the environment, what are the first things first in the environment that you're going to commit yourself to? So certainly the dwelling where the child was going to be born. In 1927, I decided man was operating on the most fundamental fallacy. He was operating on the basis that man was supposed to be a failure, and therefore he had to prove his right to live. And each man then thought he had to say, I can show how I can earn my living, that other people are supposed to die. I decided that the fallacy was that man, as designed, was designed to be an extraordinary success. His characteristics were just magnificent. And what would be necessary would really be to find out what were the great comprehensive patterns operating in the universe, how then the metaphysical man as mind could become the master of the physical. So I then said, I think my first grand strategy of finding out how to use the world's resources so they will take care of everybody would come back then to how to take care of his living equipment. This brought me then to what I call the Dymaxion Tower House, the 4D Tower House. And it was a 10-deck building which was so light and so strong as finally engineered that it could be carried by the Graf Zeppelin, which was about to be built at that time, and was perfectly flyable economically to the North Pole where it could be anchored. I gave myself then the task of designing a building which would house an airplane maintenance crew, which we'd be able to install in remote places in the Arctic so that we'd have stepping stone flights to Europe via the Arctic. Once I'd proven this feasibility of flying a whole building 10-decker to North Pole, I then turned to the idea of the single family. So I developed what I call the single family Dymaxion house. I found that I could produce a house for a family of 5 that weighed only 3 tons. It looks like a house hung in a pole simply because there's a wire wheel construction, has less weight. So I turned the wire wheel over on its side. The hub is now a mast. It had great space in it, good-sized bedrooms, each with a bath, a large living room, utility room, library, sun deck in the top, and hangar and garage down below. The whole thing came out then 3 tons. That is, I found a house equivalent to that kind of facility with all the accessories in it. And the conventional way of building at that time ran over 150 tons, so that this was a very, very small fraction of the total weight. This then brought me to a whole series of additional experiences. Later on, 20 years later, in 1947, I developed in the Beach Aircraft Company in Wichita, Kansas, the first actual Dymaxion house. I built then with the aircraft industry extraordinary structural capabilities. To my great pleasure, that first house of the same size came out just exactly 3 tons, proving my general estimates of 1927 to have been exactly correct. In 1933, I turned the money which I'd been given into cash I had in my pocket, and I arrived in Bridgeport, Connecticut, to produce this new ground taxing quality of the omni medium transport. Because it just going to go on the ground, I knew people would call it an automobile. It wasn't designed just to be an automobile at all. She was so extraordinarily stable, and my center of gravity was very, very low, and for the first vehicle that ever had the center of gravity forward to the midpoint of the wheelbase.
A front steered car with the kingpins can only steer up to 34 degrees angle. My rear rudder post I could turn so I could give it 90 degrees rudder if I wanted. This meant then when I want to come into to park, there would be a space just say 6 inches longer than my Dymaxion car. I would simply bring my nose into the curb and then throw my rear wheel sideways, and she went right and dropped like that.
I'm not trying to imitate nature. I'm trying to find the principles she's using.
When I began to try to find important questions that seemed to be fundamental, needing answer before we could get other kind of answers, I felt that the question of whether man had a function in the universe, whether he was necessary to the universe, seemed to be the most important one to be solved. To understand man's function in the universe, you'd have to have immediate reference to the most important scientific findings of our recent decades. The speed of light had not been measured till we came into this century. And with the measurement, and nobody even supposed that light had a speed. Therefore, all of the scientists before our century, looking at the stars, assumed that every star was always right there. We had what we call instant universe, which was a complete misapprehension. If we had instant universe, the universe was in a sense a thing, a static. The universe is a scenario. As for instance, we have a man who's born, and then he gets to be a father, and he has his children and grandchildren, and then he dies. They go on. But looking at the sky here, we're still seeing grandfather. So we're getting really the scenario report to us in an odd manner, very disorderly way. But universe is scenario. Now, that is just of this century that we think that way, and society is not yet thinking that way. Also then, in view of the entropy, Einstein said, I see that this child is growing up and getting bigger. Therefore, I don't think, as the scientists had been thinking up to then, that energies were always, the universe is running down. He said, I think when the energy leaves this local system, it is taken on by another system. Scientific review of experiments showed that's exactly what was going on. So only in this century have we come to discover that the energies are not lost, the universe is not running down, and our new norm is not Einstein's norm, which is that energy is always transforming, and the very highest velocities at which things can transform or change, the rate at which energy goes right away from itself radiantly, which was at the speed of light. So 186,000 miles a second is normal. Anything we call matter is where the energies trip themselves up like knots and develop local constriction and become something we call matter. But they're going around at the same speed, but very, very locally. Every local system giving off energy then must be affecting other systems. We find this is exactly what goes on. All the living creatures, for instance, are continually affecting the environment. The environment becomes changed, and the changed environment affects the creatures. This is the way in which the universe is evolving. Therefore, change is constant and change is normal. It's only since Einstein that change has become normal. I said we have all the physical, anthropic, and increasingly disorderly, and we have our own little Earth demonstrating it's a place in the universe where energies are collecting and increasingly orderly, and we have man amongst all those mammals, and we begin to try to understand him. And he has a capability that we don't find in any of the other living creatures. That is what we call mind. I differentiate between mind and brain very clearly. Brain is part of his physical equipment. Is so many cubby holes, every neuron is where he stores, like our film here or tape recording. He has every experience he has. He puts into his memory bank. The memory bank is the brain. Mind and mind alone reviews the total inventory of experience, and from time to time finds something running through all of them. As for instance, if you had a stack of punch cards, they're all the same perimeter size, say 4 by 5 inches, full of holes, look very random to you and I. Stack them all up vertically with guides to the edges and put a light below, and suddenly you see 2 holes through which light comes through. Those 2 holes are constant to every card. This is typical, we call a generalized principle. It holds true in every case. Mind has the ability to deal in the generalized principle, this absolutely abstract, weightless phenomena.
And as far as we can find out, no animals employ those generalized principles. What is really seen to be unique about man is his mind. It's only the mind that looks over all those punch cards and suddenly finds the hole through it.
If then it takes 8 minutes for the light to get to us from the sun, and takes 2.5 years for the light to get to us from the next nearest star, and this star I'm looking over here, the light is just reaching me from a show taking place 300,000 years ago. So I'm seeing a live show taking place 300,000 years ago. There's another one, hasn't been there for a million years, that star. So they said the universe is not an instantaneous aggregate. It is not then a static instant system. A universe must be thought of as an aggregate of non-simultaneous and only partially overlapping events, where everything is continually transforming. The universe is omnidynamic, is continually transforming at different kinds of rates. A scientific generalization is a pattern which has been discovered to hold absolutely true going through every case. There's no exceptions. As for instance, I'll give you a typical one. We have a man going through the forest, and he's climbing over trees, old fallen wind-blown trees, and he's climbing over one when suddenly the one he's on, he feels it sinking rather slowly, and he retreats a little and it doesn't sink, and it goes back, sinks, and turns around to see what's going on. He's lying over the top of another tree, and the other end of his tree he's standing on is under a very great big tree, and he suddenly sees that great big one lifting, and he goes over then and tries to lift that big tree with his muscle, and he finally can't budge it. So he thinks the tree he has over here, which is lifting it, is a magic tree, and he drags it home. And he keeps it there, and all the family and tribe worship it for 1,000 years, and suddenly somebody discovers that any tree will do. That's what we call then the principle of leverage. That's a generalized principle. And for instance, I'll just show you. I just take this little very light board, and I'm pretty lightweight. This big log has been lying here on this beach probably for 10 or 20 years, hasn't been moved at all. So I'll just see what I can do with it. There goes the big tree lifting. Very much smaller than my weight. So I'm balancing this where a man then demonstrates what he calls advantage. This is the beginning of the very word advantage. All around us are these generalized principles. Tension and compression. When you pull on a piece of rope like that, it gets tauter and tauter. It means it contracts its girth, so it goes from compression 90 degrees to my tensing. When I load a compression member from above here, its girth gets bigger, so it goes into tension at 90 degrees to the compressing. These are typical of the way in which we find these generalized principles right here on Bear Island. Things like this going on, being employed by man, because just right over here on the other side of the eating house here, we're using a tension and compression in a very big way. Look at boats. The compression mast, the tension stays, the tension halyards, the tension sails. Here we get a beautiful differentiation of tasks, the tension versus the compression. A sailing ship is a very extraordinary matter. It opens up the sea, but unlike the bulldozer, it doesn't hurt the sea. The sea closes in again. And it gets from here to there without taking anything out of the energy wealth of the universe. Order everywhere. What looks disorderly to man's mind, because he doesn't understand that particular geometry, it turns out to be extraordinarily orderly if you begin to get into the actual mathematics of it. I begin to look at all these rocks and it doesn't look like anything. And then I begin to pick them up. And I pick up any rock and I find it has a beautiful face here, and then another beautiful face, another beautiful face. These are not carelessly done. And you begin to study those rocks a little more, and you find face, face, face. Nature's doing things in very logical, clean-cut ways. And we begin to study those even more. I find she's using beautiful geometry. This always finally gets down to the simplest geometry you can get down to. You can't have a geometrical form of less than 4 faces. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's what they call the tetrahedrons. Then sometimes after it gets to be a beautiful tetrahedron, then the ends get knocked off a bit. So this once was a tetrahedron, and then they got sheared off here a little more, cut off the point of that tetrahedron. Nature's operating always under beautiful rules, and if you just go over your experiences, you suddenly find those generalized patterns that are operating there that can be employed subjectively to give you great advantage. You look at any painting, any drawing, just research your memory, you find everything breaks down into lines, areas, and crossings. Those lines of Euler's take some time to be generated, and how long they take to be generated is measured by some kind of cycle. You look at your watch, you look at so many seconds, there's so many cycles, so many heartbeats. So you go in this direction on this line for so many heartbeats or so many seconds, and then you change your direction. So you have to say, what is the angle of change? In order to start talking angle at all, you have to have some line of reference. So you take, say, the line of reference between your head and your feet. So there's that line, and you observe in relation to the angle, this line of yourself. You go at such and such an angle off from the vertical, and you go in so many seconds. Then you say, I now change and go in another angle, which is also describable in relation to the original line. So that we find all phenomena in the universe can be described mathematically by angle and frequency change. The frequency being then how many cycles there are that you went along any one line. Now that we then know that time is measured by cycles and lines are so many cycles long, we begin to think about patterns in a very mutable kind of a way. As for instance, I got here a necklace. It's a necklace because I can drape it over my shoulders. It's drapable. And the reason it's drapable is that the angles are all varying. The lines, which are such and such a length, because let's say one of these lines is so many frequencies long, so many heartbeats you get from here to there. Each one of those lines is staying the same. The lines are not changing, so what is changing here is the angles. I'm going to take out one of the necklace strands. Let that go out. So she's still nice and flexible, and she's still drape it over me. Now I'm going to take out one more of those. And still is all flexible and drapes around on my shoulders. I'm going to take out one more. Came apart on me. I'd like to take out one more. And it still is flexible. You and I tend to call what we have left here at the present time a square. But it really isn't square, because it distorts. In diamond, it can drape over my, it's a necklace that can hang over my shoulders like that, completely flexible that way. It can fold up into just look like one. I'm going to take out one more bead out of that necklace. And suddenly, a very extraordinary thing happens. No longer is it flexible. For the first and only time, I can put it on my head here, but it doesn't flex or drape at all. The angles won't change. This is what we call a triangle. Now, this triangle, if I were to take out one more, there wouldn't be any area at all. So I have a limit condition where I've gone down to where it suddenly stops flexing, which means that the angles don't change anymore. We knew the lines weren't changing at all, so it was all an angle. So triangle turns out to be what we'll call structure. It does consist of 6 parts. There are this edge, 3 edges, and 3 corners. And the corners themselves are something holding it together, so that we find that, let's take one pair of these sides. They're like levers, and if you have a pair of scissors or pliers, you know, the further you come out here, the more work you can do. You have more leverage advantage. So we come to the very ends of these levers, and then we put another push-pull member in here, and it stabilizes the opposite angle. So a triangle is a pattern where each side stabilizes the opposite angle with minimum effort. What we call then a structure in our universe is a complex of energy events which are inter-self-stabilizing. And the triangle is the only inter-self-stabilizing set of a complex of events. So triangle is structure. And the triangle having 3 parts, you have the word 3, a trace, or the word truss that you're familiar with. That's really from the Latin then, of the 3-ness of the triangle. So this has been known to man for a very long time. So when I want to build something and make it really work, I've got to use all triangles. And for instance, just look at our friend the cube. And most people think of buildings, cubical buildings, as being stable. But here's that cubical building, and it hasn't any structural stability whatsoever. The angles are all unstable. Now, every structural system in the universe, in fact, every event we have something called, we have an action, and when you take action, for instance, you step forward, you push the earth backward, and you see this automobile starting up and kicking these stones backwardly. Now, not only does every action have a reaction, but it also has a resultant. It starts pushing the air apart. So every event in the universe has three parts: action, reaction, and resultant. And we make these lines representing all of our experiences. We call them vectors. They are energy events, and the energy event, it depends on how much energy that is being expended, what its mass is, and what direction it's going, at what velocity, all of which we have spelled out, remember, in angular frequency. So this is one energy event: action, reaction, resultant. Now, the physicist then is able to use this kind of a way of thinking of the vectors as a basic energy event, and he has two most fundamental kind of energy events, because he has the proton and the neutron. Either one would be called a nucleon, and we find the proton and the neutron always and only coexisting. And the proton has its energy side effects. The proton has its electron and its antineutrino, and the neutron has its neutrino and its positron. And each one of those is called, by physics, 1/2 quantum, 1/2 of Planck's constant, 1/2 spin, any one of those three. Now, I'm going to put 1/2 quantum together with another half quantum. And we find, I must always put it together in an absolutely consistent way. We call that male goes to female here. So this male going to the female. And here again, I've got a male which must go to a female. This leaves me then another male here which must go to a female. So here's a female. And make that fast, and we now have one male left, and that we find one female left. We put it together, and then suddenly we come to our friend the tetrahedron, which is the basic structural system in the universe. And because each one of those is a half quantum, the two together make one unit of quantum. So we now see a very important conceptuality beginning to characterize physics and all of structural understanding. Then there are two other structural systems in the universe besides the tetrahedron. The tetrahedron itself, we have 3 triangles around each corner. We can have the octahedron with 4 triangles around each corner. And we can have the icosahedron with 5 triangles around each corner. You can't have 6 triangles around each corner because they'd add up to 360 degrees, and that would go on to infinity. So in order to be able to return upon itself, have insiders and outsiders, the limits are tetrahedron, octahedron, icosahedron. Now I take the icosahedron itself, and I'm going to be able to remember then that a basic unit of quantum has 6 edges, or 6 vectors. So a basic energy event has 6 vectors. We'll call that then one unit of quantum. There'll always be 6 edges. And we find that the octahedron has 12 edges, or 2 units of quantum. The icosahedron has 30 edges, and 30 divided by 6 means there are 5 units of quantum. And the tetrahedron by itself has then 6 edges, or the 1 unit of quantum. If I use the volume of a tetrahedron as unity, the octahedron has 4 volumes, and the icosahedron has almost pretty close to 24 volumes. So that for 1 unit of quantum, which is 6 edges, to get 1 unit volume here. But here I get, however, 2 units of quantum, giving me 4 units of volume, and here I'm getting 20 units of volume for 5 units of quantum invested, so that we get the most volume with the least quantum in the icosahedron. So that becomes then a very basic structural system. I use it for geodesic domes. Nature used it for all of the protein shells of all of the viruses. Remembering then our 6 units of vector edge give us 1 unit of quantum, I'm going to take 1 unit of quantum out of the icosahedron, which has the 30 edges, or 5 units of quantum in. I'm going to take one and just leave it 4 of them in. So what I have to do is to go around taking out 1 bar like that, Then I'm going to have to take out another bar over here. And I come around and take out another bar over here. I go into the other hemisphere, opposite that triangle. I've taken out 3 so far, and I want to leave this way, so I now take one out here. Take this one out here. That's 5. Need one more to be removed, and here it is. So here we now have what they call the vector equilibrium with 8 triangles and 6 squares. I'm going to articulate it. I'm going to take this top triangle, and it must be lowered towards the triangle on the table, and the triangle on the table mustn't twist, and the triangle up here mustn't. Just simply lower towards it. So as I start to do that, here we suddenly become the icosahedron stage. Then I keep lowering. The point still stays out towards you, and lower, suddenly becomes the octahedron. So we see a complete transformation from the vector equilibrium through the icosahedron down to the octahedronal condition. Now supposing, and we see all the vectors have been doubled up, all the edges have been doubled up, so this is very powerful. Now supposing this were a force, if I pull on it here, this forces it to contract. Supposing this were revolving in space, a whole group of stars, and another great star group here made a mass attraction and simply retarded this thing, then it would force it to contract. Now supposing the contraction then, the direction I see it coming around towards me like this, now this would make this top suddenly twist, torque, and plunge through in this manner to become the tetrahedron. So now we've gone through a great, complete set of transformations from vector equilibrium through icosahedron, through octahedron, down to the tetrahedron, or the 3 basic structural systems in the universe. And now we see all of the vectors are fourfold. This way we go, for instance, from carbon, which is very relatively lightweight and soft, down to very hard diamond by getting into the doubling up of the vectors of the edges. Now we'll unwind again, up we come, back again to our friend the vector equilibrium, and we find that this pumps, sometimes it's called the jitterbug, pumping, 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 but the center is not twisting. This point always stays towards you, so we have the whole system is contracting symmetrically. All 12 points approach the common center at a symmetrical rate. We have a very extraordinary matter in engineering here. Supposing then you would have a pressure on the roof of your building, you're used to the idea of the building flattening. But if the pressure on the top of the building here means that the whole building contracts symmetrically. The vector equilibrium contains the whole phenomenology of structure of universe. And it's 12 vertices here. If we put one in the center, it's called vector equilibrium because it consists of 4 hexagons. You can see a hexagon plane here at the center, another hexagon plane here, another hexagonal plane here, and a 4th one here. And each one of those has 6 radii. So the 6 radii, the 12 radii to these 12 points are equal in value to the chords, because you think, look at a hexagon, has 6 edges and 6 radii. They're equal value, so the tendency to explode and the tendency to contract are exactly balanced. That's why it's called the vector equilibrium. And they represent the closest packing of spheres around one sphere. A sphere here, and then 12 spheres around it. So this represents the basis of all atomic packings, oscillations, and wave phenomena that are articulated in our electromagnetic world.
Vector equilibrium, then, is never witnessed by man. It is as pure as God. It is truth that is approached. It is exactitude that is approached. The nearest thing to the total patterning of all the patterns of complexity in the universe that we can find to the universe itself is man.
Let's identify man to start off with as what I call a pattern integrity. And I'd like to make clear what I mean by pattern integrity. I'm going to take a piece of manila rope, and then I'm going to splice into it a piece of cotton rope. Splice in the other end of the cotton rope a piece of nylon rope. I'm going to make the very simplest knot that I know, which is simply to go around like 360 degrees in this plane, 360 degrees in that plane. Not going to pull it tight. There's that knot where the rope has not done this. I have done it to the rope. Then I can slide this knot right along. It's still a loose knot. I haven't pulled it tight. I slide it along on the rope. And now it leaves the manila, and now it's on the cotton. Now I keep sliding it along. Now it's on the nylon, so suddenly it's off the end. We say the knot was a pattern integrity. It wasn't manila, it wasn't cotton, it wasn't nylon. Though cotton and nylon and manila, any one of them were good to let us know about its shape, what its pattern was, but it was not that. It had an integrity in its own. We drop a stone in the water, and the most beautiful circular wave emanates. And I then try it in milk, and it works as well. I try in kerosene, so I discover that wave is a pattern integrity. And then the next thing that I try is say, I'd like to know about that wave apparently isn't just water, and it isn't milk, and so then I try sprinkling sawdust all over the water. Very neatly, make beautiful film of sawdust. Then I drop one piece of red popcorn on it, and I put a transit and a moving picture camera very carefully aimed at that red popcorn. We drop the stone over here in the water, and the yellow sawdust makes a wave, and suddenly the red popcorn goes out from the center of the earth into the center of earth, comes right back where it was. They simply went in and out towards the center of earth to accommodate the wave, to let it go by, just as a piece of rope accommodated the knot sliding along on it.
Where are we? You know what you could do, Dale? I can see you keep reaching, and I was thinking you kind of keep reaching Antarctic and going off. This is pretty good. I call it the Inventory of World Resources, Human Trends and Needs. It is my headquarters. So now I can see all the world at once without any visible distortion of the relative shape or relative size of any of the data. Now this is very convenient because also I've been able to do it in such a way what we call the sinuses, where it breaks open. All in the water, so there are no breaks in the continental contours which we have in all of our world maps. So now you can see the whole world at once without any visible distortion, without any breaks in the continental contours, which means I have one world island and one world ocean. This gives me a basic background against which we're going to study resources, pollutions and so forth. We really want to know percentages. And if you put it on a background that's very distorted, such as the Mercator map, you don't get the right information. But because there's no distortion, if I find out where the demographic center for all the human beings are, and I put on 1,000 pins representing each one to be 1/10 of 1% of humanity, where he actually exists. I put him on this background, and it really is accurate. So any percentims that I put on here really can be read as percentims. If math was very distorted, you wouldn't get that sensation. So this makes it possible to really study world problems and get to the pollutions and resources and so forth. This is fundamental. On this map, I put a little disc, a skin color of the predominant skin of the people in that area. And you suddenly see something very simple. First place, I simply say, the colder it gets, the more bleached out they are, the whiter they are. In order for man to be born as he is, helpless and ignorant, and he's not born with a fur coat on, he's born naked. And when he's first born, and there's no other man on whom, you have to have him born in a place where he won't freeze to death because he's naked, and where he won't be dehydrated. So probably is this really quite very warm, beautiful water area. The Maori and so forth, the Polynesian are probably the earliest men, with a relatively dark skin. They go finally moving westward, sailing westward, they get in Africa, and it gets very dry, and it gets drier, and then they get even blacker. But normal color skin is really quite dark. Then gradually following sheep and eating his sheep, and using his sheep's skin, and making skins for his tents and so forth, he was able to get into colder and colder areas. But it took thousands of years for him to do so. Gradually, and he had to stay, and suddenly it's cold in winter, and he had to get into a cave, and anything, he had to hibernate. And so, as he did so, we finally find these people bleaching out. So the bleached out light color skinned man is Johnny come lately, and the normal man is very dark skinned. Each pin here is 1/12 of 1% of humanity. I want you to get a little feeling by looking at it of the really how sparse the population in America is. About almost the same kind of density in South America, but then look at this fantastic, how Europe, concentration of people in England, concentration in Western Europe there, Italy not so bad, she's thinning down as she gets in Russia. Then there's vast distances, incidentally, between where Russia exists and where India and China are. But when you get to this area here, here's half of all humanity. Boom! Just look at them. In China, the first movable type appears. You find the first balloons. You find the quaternary alloys. 2000 BC in China. Industrialization really starts there. The differentiation of tension, compression, the beautiful sails and masts, and then that went westward around the world, improving metal workers in India, got even better in Europe with their armor making and so forth. Then they got in beginning of real industrialization, and here all the great scientists are all right in here. What is going on here is not only the accommodation of my own world around activities, which are becoming large, and I literally do live around the world, but also I have this unique function of opening up new frontiers. It could be that the world game which I've been developing here may become the whole curriculum of the university itself. My subject is that based on a very big picture. The very big picture is of all humanity now going through a transition so unprecedented, so unexpected as to be really very difficult to comprehend. And it's not just like going through the looking glass where you get a reverse pattern of yesterday. I can tell you that there are approximately at all times now 66 million babies in the wombs of their mothers. So 66 million is a very large number. See, it would be in the size of the nations, it would be a 10th largest nation in the world. I think all of humanity is coming out of a sort of a group womb of permitted ignorance of man, permitted ignorance, which is not a statement derogatory to man, but simply because it is the nature of the total process of regenerating life on earth, that the new life as born is born absolutely helpless and completely uninformed, though it has beautiful equipment, and being absolutely uninformed, it is very ignorant. That's what the word means. And even when I was young, humanity was 90% illiterate, and we've gone suddenly to almost complete 90% literacy, so that anywhere I go around the world, people have good vocabularies, and those good vocabularies got proliferated by the radio, getting into the homes and not through schools, and the television even more so, where they could correlate the words and the vision to see the objects, so that we have communication capability all of a sudden. But gradually discovering we do have this intellectual ability to acquire information and finding there are very reliable behaviors out of the physical universe which can be employed. Democracy certainly couldn't work so long as you
The number of people who are now talking about roofs over cities is very, very large. It's now getting to be accepted logic in the bigger planning and so forth. It's getting into the lingo. And it's the Garden of Eden, very small compared to talking about cities, but it certainly opens up the thoughts about such larger undertakings. Every time you double the size of a dome, your energy conservation goes up very rapidly. We get something the size of a city, and the energy conservation will be such that the enormous kinds of problems they're having today about heat control and the air conditioning and enormous energy power would be reduced to almost negligible. And the dome on the city side, you just would not be aware of the grid at all. It would just be not quite as bright. In this expo dome, we have a three-quarter sphere, so the walls start going away from you, and there's a very extraordinary psychological effect of this releasing you. Inside the expo dome, you suddenly realize that the walls really are not there. There's something that's keeping the rain away from you. It's like an umbrella above you. You don't feel shut in. And it was not done in the aesthetics of architecture as we know, as architecture has been practiced up to now, but it was done simply in the terms of doing that most to the least. I walked around and listened to what the crowd said. They seemed to be terribly happy. Now that we know that we can cope with nature's most hostile actions of earthquakes, hurricanes, great Arctic snow loads, and now that we know how to get the best mathematics to get the most volume with the least. Next thing is, how do we produce the surfaces that will do this in the highest speed in the most economical, effective manner? Nothing moves quite so fast as the printing press. Perfectly possible then making what we call paperboard domes, where you print this beautiful mathematics on it, folding lines, and the thing folds itself. We can now produce on just one paper-making machine 3,000 houses a day at about 5 cents a square foot against around $2 a square foot for our usual kind of enclosure. Being made out of the right craft papers, we have very high wet tensile strength, compressive strength, and they can last as long as any homes that we've ever been familiar with. So your house can be really delivered anywhere as your umbrella can be carried with you. But to combine that then with our astronaut's black box, which is the package by virtue of which you can regenerate all the chemistries of humanity and keep life going with the most economical way at the size of a suitcase. You have in effect man within his umbrella and his briefcase able to go anywhere in the universe and live at a very high standard of living. On the false working assumption that there's nowhere nearly enough to go around and never will be, that has to be you or me, man has then said, you must earn the right to live. You're supposed to die. You must show you're better than the other man. On this basis then, society has been assuming that it's a handout or a socialist system if you're not earning a living at some job somebody has set out for you. So we have the idea of a job is something you have to do that you don't like to do very much, in contrast to what your mind tells you needs to be done or you would like to do. So that the idea then, this is the earning living idea. And we said we don't want you to feel like pick and shovel kind of a job. We do that by the bulldozer. We don't even want you to be blue jeans. That's kind of gets your hands dirty. We want everybody to be white collar. So in order to have everybody white collar invent the jobs, we've had to invent an enormous number of buildings. Every one of our cities is filled with great buildings to accommodate these people working. Now we also have the real estate saying it's very unhealthy for the butcher to sleep with the meat. So every one of our cities is filled with fantastic great buildings today in which nobody's allowed to sleep. Therefore, at night we have all typewriters sleeping with all the beautiful plumbing and all the people sleeping in the slums without any plumbing. So what we're going to do is to simply make some sense now and say, I don't want you to be taking a job where it's not what you really like to do. I want you to know, go back to where you were a kid. What were you thinking about when they told you how to earn a living? I'm going to give everybody a fellowship to think. Out of every 1,000 you give such a fellowship to, one will make a breakthrough to pay for everybody. So we're going to
fought easily. So we're going to say that the minute you do that, those people are going to leave all those buildings. They won't come back because they don't need that money for that fake job. And we're going to move all the people out of the slums right into those beautiful buildings. So the urban problem is actually completely solved today. People say to me, I wonder what it'd be like to be on a spaceship. And I say to you, you don't really realize what you're doing, because everybody is an astronaut. You all live aboard a beautiful little spaceship called Earth, and this very only tiny little thing, 1,000-mile diameter ball. What is now as clear as the speed of light itself is our realization that we've come to enough knowledge about how to do so much with so little, to understand enough about our great universe and man in the universe to realize his function is that of the mind, ability to bring great order. And we have the beautiful realization that Einstein's great conceptioning can go from weaponry to livingry, and it is now practical. The metaphysical really master the physical. This is what man tends to call utopia. It's a fairly small word, but inadequate to describe the extraordinary new freedom of man in a new relationship to the universe, the alternative which is oblivion.